When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because tears felt useless by then. Maybe because deep inside I had already lost them long before that day. She stood at the kitchen door, her arms folded, her eyes sharp and cold. My son Peter sat quietly at the table, pretending to scroll on his phone. She said, "It's time you move back to your own place, Mama. We need our space." And I remember answering softly, "Of course." No shouting, no begging. Just that one word that carried all my pain inside it. You see, I had sold my little house 2 years earlier to help them buy theirs. Every bit of money my husband and I had saved for old age, I gave to them. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was what mothers do. But that morning, standing in the house I had paid for, being told to leave, I realized love without respect is only a kind of blindness. I didn't cry that day. I went to my small room, folded my clothes, and packed my few things into an old suitcase. The same one I carried when I first came to this village as a young bride. Peter didn't look at me. He just said, "It's for the best. Mama, you'll be more comfortable somewhere quiet." He didn't notice the silence that followed. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. I left their house with one suitcase and a heart full of questions. Where had I gone wrong? How did my own son become a stranger? As I walked down the path, I felt the wind against my face and thought of my husband. Anton, he had always said, "Be careful who you trust with your kindness. Maria, even love can turn into debt." He was right. I just never imagined that lesson would come from our own child. That was the day everything changed. The day my world became smaller, quieter, but somehow clearer. That was the day I began my revenge. Not the kind that hurts others, but the kind that heals yourself first. The kind that teaches you to stand again. When you have nothing left but your own dignity. Before all of this, my life was simple. Peaceful, even. I lived in a small stone cottage on the edge of a village in northern Hungary. The hills were green in summer, golden in autumn, and white in winter. Every morning, I would open my window to hear the church bells and the sound of roosters. From the farm nearby, I liked small things. The smell of bread baking, the warmth of sunlight on my kitchen floor, the way the old apple tree bent towards my window as if it wanted to say, "Good morning." Anton and I built that house together after our wedding. He was a quiet man, not one for big words. But his hands always worked, fixing, planting, making sure our little world stayed steady. We had one child, Peter. He was the light of our lives. When he was small, he used to run into my arms every afternoon after school. "Mama, look what I found," he'd say, holding up a shiny stone or a bird feather. I kept many of those little treasures in a box under my bed. When Anton passed away, Peter was already married to Anna. They lived in the city then. He called every Sunday. "Mama, we'll visit soon," he used to say. And I believed him, because mothers always believe their children mean what they say. Years went by and I grew older. The house became too quiet. The winters too long. So when Peter said, "Sell the house, Mama, move in with us. You shouldn't be alone," my heart filled with gratitude. He said it with kindness, or at least it sounded like kindness then. I didn't see what was coming. I sold my home and gave them the money. "It's for your future," I told him. "You can buy something better for your family." He kissed my forehead and said, "You're the best mother anyone could ask for." I moved into their new house, a beautiful white cottage near the river. It wasn't as cozy as my old one, but it was full of laughter at first. Anna seemed sweet then. She brought me tea and asked about my garden. She even called me Mama in those first few months. I cooked for them, helped with the cleaning, and took care of their baby, little Sophia. I loved that child more than anything. She would sit on my lap and touch my face with her tiny hands. And for a moment, it felt like everything was perfect again. But slowly, I began to feel like a guest. My things were moved from the living room to a corner of the hallway. My seat at the table changed from the center to the side. Then one day, my room was moved upstairs, away from everyone else. Little things. Small signs that something was changing. Anna started making rules about how I should spend money, how often I could visit the market, even how I cooked. Peter said she was just being practical, but I could feel the wall growing between us. At night, I would sit by the window, looking at the stars, whispering to Anton in my heart. I did what you would have done, I told him. I tried to keep the family close. He didn't answer, of course. The dead never do. But somehow, I could feel his silence saying, be patient. Maria, life always shows the truth in time. I held on to that thought. I didn't know that time was already preparing to teach me a hard, painful lesson. I still remember the first day I met Anna. It was spring, and Peter had brought her home for Easter. The lilac bushes outside were in full bloom, and I had spent the whole morning preparing lunch. She walked into the kitchen with a smile that could melt butter. She had soft brown hair, neat hands, and eyes that looked at everything carefully as if she was measuring it. Mama, this is Anna, Peter said proudly. She's studying accounting. I remember wiping my hands on my apron and saying, welcome, dear. You must be tired after the trip. She shook my hand gently and said, it's lovely here. So peaceful. And that was how she entered our lives. At first, she seemed kind. She helped me in the kitchen, asked about the recipes, and said how much she loved the smell of fresh bread. Anton liked her too. He said, she's polite. That's good. Maybe she'll keep Peter's feet on the ground. When they got married the next year, I was proud. They looked happy together. I remember standing in the church, holding Anton's arm, watching our only son promise to love and protect this woman. After Anton passed away a few years later, Peter and Anna visited every few months. They brought me gifts, small things like tea or scarves. Anna always smiled, always spoke politely, but there was a distance, something I couldn't name then. She never asked much about my life. Her eyes often wandered when I spoke, as if she had something more important waiting. Still, I told myself it was just the difference between generations. Young people are busy. They don't mean harm. When Peter told me they wanted to buy a house in the countryside, I felt happy. We'll finally be close again, he said. You can see your granddaughter whenever you like. And when he asked me to sell my house, it didn't even feel like a sacrifice. I wanted to help. I thought if I can make their lives easier, why not? Anna thanked me. She said, you'll always have a home with us, Mama. Always. Those words stayed with me for a long time. Because when people promise you something with a smile, you want to believe them. In the beginning, living with them felt like being part of a new chapter. Peter would leave for work early, Anna would make breakfast, and little Sophia would giggle in her high chair. I cooked lunch, tended to the garden, and told bedtime stories. Sometimes in the evenings, we'd sit together watching the sunset from the porch. Peter would hold Sophia on his lap, and Anna would rest her head on his shoulder. I used to sit beside them and think, this is happiness. This is family. But happiness, I've learned, can be fragile. It can fade without you even noticing. One day, Anna asked, Mama, do you think you could cook a bit less for dinner? We're trying to eat lighter. I smiled and said, of course. Then, a week later, she said, Mama, could you watch Sophia only in the mornings? I'm trying to build a routine for her. I said yes again. And slowly, the little things I used to do began to disappear. My hands had less to do. My voice was heard less often. The kitchen, once my favorite place, began to feel like someone else's room. Peter didn't notice much. He was busy with work. He often came home tired, with dark circles under his eyes. I tried to talk to him sometimes, but he would just nod, saying later, Mama, I'm exhausted. So I spoke less. I didn't want to be a burden. Anna, meanwhile, began to manage everything, the bills, the house, even Peter's pay. She had lists for everything. She liked order, and maybe that was her way of feeling safe. But for me, it began to feel like control. One afternoon, she sat with me in the living room and said, Mama, about the money from your house, I've invested it. It'll grow, and we'll all benefit. I didn't really understand the details, but I trusted her. I told her I don't need much. Just keep a little for me, in case I want to buy something small. She smiled and said, Of course, Mama. Don't worry. So I didn't. Months went by. Sophia grew fast. She started school. Peter got a promotion. And Anna began dressing differently. Better clothes, new jewelry. She said it was all thanks to her smart investments. I was proud. though a small voice inside me wondered whose money had started it all. One evening, while I was washing dishes, I overheard them in the next room. Anna said, "We can't keep paying for everything. Your mother should manage her own expenses." Peter replied, "She doesn't spend much, and it's her money too." Anna's voice lowered. "Her money is our money now, Peter. You said it yourself. She gave it to us. Don't start feeling guilty." I stopped washing. My hands trembled. I wanted to walk in and say something, but I didn't. I just stood there, listening to the sound of my own heart beating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I looked at the moonlight through the window and whispered, "Anton, I think I've been foolish." The next morning, Anna was cheerful again, acting as if nothing had happened. Peter kissed my cheek and left for work. Life went on the surface. But something had cracked inside me. A small, invisible line between love and disappointment. I began to see things differently. The way Anna looked at me when I touched something in the kitchen. The way Peter avoided my eyes when money came up. The way my name was no longer said with affection, but with mild impatience. I still loved them, of course. Love doesn't vanish just because it's wounded. But I began to understand. That love without respect feels like standing in a room full of people and realizing no one sees you anymore. I started going for walks alone. Down to the river, across the fields, into the woods. The air there was kinder. I could think, breathe, remember who I used to be before all this. Sometimes Sophia would run after me and say, "Grandma, where are you going?" And I'd tell her, "Just for a walk, little one. Just for a walk." She'd take my hand and come along. Those moments with her kept me going. She reminded me of Peter when he was small, full of light, before the world taught him to hide it. But even those walks began to fade when Anna said, "Mama, please don't take Sophia out so often. She catches colds easily." I nodded again, always nodding, always agreeing, until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was already on its way. And it would arrive on a morning that began like any other, calm, quiet, ordinary. The morning that began the change was like any other. The sun came in softly through the curtains. The house smelled of coffee, and I was in the kitchen making breakfast. Anna came in, her hair tied neatly, her phone in her hand. She looked at the table, then at me. "Mama," she said, "don't make so much coffee. Peter and I prefer the machine one now." It was such a small thing, but it stung. I had been making coffee for Peter since he was a boy. He used to say, "No one made it like me." I smiled and said, "Of course." That word again, my quiet shield. Peter came down a few minutes later, kissed Sophia on her forehead, and barely looked at me. I watched him rush out of the door, his tie crooked, his hair messy, his eyes tired. I wanted to reach out and fix his collar, the way I used to when he was young. But I stopped myself. He didn't need a mother fussing over him anymore. The house felt colder after he left. Anna sat at the table, scrolling on her phone. "Do you want more tea?" I asked. She shook her head without looking up. I sat down across from her and folded my hands. That was how most of our mornings began. Quiet, polite, distant. The little cracks started with silence. It wasn't one big fight or a cruel word. Just small things that built up slowly, like dust settling on a once bright table until it looks dull without anyone noticing when it happened. One afternoon, Anna came home in a hurry. She had papers in her hand and a frown on her face. She said, "Mama, the electricity bill is too high. You must be leaving the lights on again." I told her gently, "No, dear, I'm careful." She sighed and said, "We just need to be more responsible. That's all." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the tone of someone correcting a child. A week later, she said, "Mama, could you please use less water when you wash the dishes? We're paying too much for utilities." Again, I said, "Of course." Those small remarks piled up inside me. I began to count them in my head, like stones in a jar. Then came the day I opened my wardrobe and found some of my things missing. My old blanket, a few dishes from my box. The vase Anton had given me on our first anniversary. When I asked Anna about it, she said lightly, "Oh, I donated them. They were just taking up space." I wanted to say something, but the words froze. To her, they were just objects. To me, they were my memories, little pieces of a life I had before I became just mama, in someone else's house. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I wondered if this was how loneliness began, not when you're alone, but when you live with people who no longer see you. Peter didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. He was always busy, always tired. When I tried to tell him about how Anna made me feel, he said, "Mama, she's just under pressure. Don't take it personally." So I stayed silent again. But silence has its own way of breaking things. It eats at your heart slowly, until one day you realize you're only pretending to be fine. Sophia, my little granddaughter, was my only joy then. She would run into my room every morning, jump on my bed and whisper, "Grandma, wake up." We would have breakfast together, and she would tell me stories from school about her drawings, her friends, her teacher who smelled like vanilla. But even that began to change. One day when she came into my room, Anna called out sharply, "Sophia, leave Grandma alone. She needs her rest." The child froze. She looked at me, confused. I smiled and said, "It's all right, sweetheart. Grandma's not tired." But Anna's voice came again, firm this time. "Go do your homework." Sophia walked away slowly. That was the first time she didn't hug me goodbye. After that, Anna often found reasons to keep her busy, extra lessons, chores, activities. I saw her less and less. The house grew quieter. My days became long and empty. Sometimes I would sit by the window for hours just watching the clouds move. I began knitting again, not because I needed scarves, but because I needed something to keep my hands from shaking. I thought about my husband often, about how we built our little home with patience and laughter, how we worked in the garden together, how we never had much, but it was enough. Now I had everything I thought I wanted, a roof over my head, family nearby, yet I felt poorer than ever. I started to see Anna's eyes differently. When she looked at me, there was no warmth anymore, just calculation, as if she were measuring how long she'd have to tolerate me. Once I heard her on the phone with a friend. She said, "It's not easy living with an old woman. She means well, but she doesn't understand boundaries." Her friend must have said something funny, because Anna laughed at that bright, cheerful laugh that once made me like her. But to me it sounded sharp, like glass breaking. That evening I packed a small bag. Just a few clothes, my rosary, and the photo of Anton and me on our wedding day. I didn't leave, not yet. But I wanted to know that if the moment came, I could. I didn't hate Anna. I don't think I ever could. But I began to see that kindness can become weakness if you give it to people who don't value it. One Sunday, Peter asked if I could watch Sophia for the day while they went shopping. I was overjoyed. We baked cookies, sang songs, and laughed like we used to. She looked up at me and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, can I live with you?" I smiled, though my heart ached. "Maybe one day, little one." When they came home that evening, Anna barely thanked me. She looked at the crumbs on the floor and said, "Next time, please keep the kitchen cleaner." It wasn't what she said that hurt. It was how easily she said it, as if my presence, my effort, my love were all things to be managed, not cherished. After that, something changed in me. I still did the chores, I still smiled, but my smiles became lighter, my words fewer. Inside, I began preparing for something, though I didn't know what. It's strange how the human heart works. It breaks slowly, quietly, and by the time you realize it's shattered, there's no sound left to make. But every quiet breaking also plants a seed, and mine was already growing, a seed of calm defiance, of quiet revenge. Not to hurt them, no, but to remind myself that I was still someone, that my life, my memories, my love, still meant something. That realization would bloom fully on a morning. I'll never forget the day everything truly fell apart. It was a Saturday morning in early spring. The sky was clear, the air was soft, and I remember thinking it would be a good day. I woke up early, as always. The house was quiet. I made tea, fed the birds outside, and started kneading dough for bread. The smell filled the kitchen. Warm and comforting, the kind of smell that makes a house feel like home. I was humming to myself when I heard voices from the hallway. Anna and Peter were talking softly at first, then louder. I didn't mean to listen. But when people you love are whispering, your heart listens before your ears do. Anna's voice came first. Peter, we can't keep doing this. We need our privacy. She's always here, always watching. Peter sighed. She's my mother, Anna. I know, she said quickly. But she's not happy here either. You see it. She feels out of place. We all do. It's not healthy. There was silence, then Peter's tired voice. So what do you want me to do? Anna said quietly, but firmly, ask her to move out. It's time. The dough slipped from my hands. I stood frozen, my palms covered in flour. For a moment, I hoped I had misheard. I wanted to believe that my son, my boy who once cried when I left him at school, would never let such words into his heart. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. Peter said nothing for a long time. Then he whispered, she won't understand. Anna replied, she'll be fine. We'll help her find a place. She needs peace, and so do we. I wiped my hands, walked back to my room, and sat on the bed. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I stared at the old photo of Anton on the bedside table. His eyes were calm, the way they always were when life got hard. Oh, Anton, I whispered. They want me to leave. It was strange. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, numb. When Peter came to my room that evening, he looked nervous. He stood by the door like a child caught doing something wrong. Mama, he began, can we talk? I nodded. He sat down beside me. You know, we love you, he said, but things have been difficult. Anna thinks you'd be more comfortable somewhere quiet. Maybe closer to your friends in town. I smiled a little, though my lips trembled. Closer to my friends? I repeated. Or farther from you. He looked down. He couldn't answer. I gave you everything I had, I said softly. I sold my house. My life savings. I did it so we could be together. I know, he whispered, and I'll always be grateful. Grateful, I said quietly, but not enough to let me stay. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. I wasn't angry, just tired. Don't worry, I said. I understand. He looked at me with guilt in his eyes. But guilt doesn't change anything once the damage is done. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the moon move across the sky. It felt like the same moon Anton and I used to look at from our garden. The same one that had watched over my life through every joy and sorrow. I thought of Sophia, of her laughter, her tiny hands holding mine. I thought of how she would wake up the next morning and not know her grandmother was leaving. When the sun rose, I began packing. I folded my clothes carefully, the way I always had. I put Anton's photo on top of the pile, wrapped in a scarf. I packed my knitting, a few letters, and the box with the feathers and stones Peter had brought me when he was a boy. Every item I touched carried a memory, and each memory felt heavier than the suitcase itself. When I walked into the kitchen, Anna was there. She looked surprised, then relieved. You're up early, she said. I'm leaving, I told her simply. She blinked. Oh, I thought we'd have more time to arrange something. I've already arranged enough things in my life, I said quietly. This one I'll do on my own. She hesitated. Where will you go? I don't know yet, I said, but I'll find somewhere. She nodded, as if I had confirmed something she'd been hoping to hear. When Peter came down, he looked pale. Mama, you don't have to rush. We can talk again. I shook my head. No, Peter, you made your choice. Now I'm making mine. He tried to hug me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said softly. If you hug me now, I might stay. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. But sometimes tears come too late. I took my suitcase and walked out. The air outside was cool and clean. The birds were singing as if nothing had happened. The path down from the house was the same one I had walked many times before, holding Sophia's hand. This time, I walked alone. At the end of the lane, I turned back once. I saw the White House, the one I had paid for, shining in the morning sun. For a second, I thought I saw Anton standing by the gate, smiling as if to say, "You'll be all right." I walked on. The village wasn't far, just a few kilometers away. I stopped by the old church and sat on the bench outside. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt strangely light. I had lost everything, my home, my savings, my family, but I still had myself. And maybe, I thought, that was something worth rebuilding. That day, an old friend saw me at the church and came over. Her name was Clara. We had known each other since we were girls. But time and distance had made us strangers. "Maria?" she said in surprise. "What are you doing here with a suitcase?" I smiled faintly. Starting over. She took me to her small cottage near the fields. It was simple but warm. She made soup and gave me a bed to sleep in. That night, for the first time in months, I felt safe. When I woke up the next morning, the world seemed different. Not easier, but clearer. I realized I didn't need to beg anyone for a place in their life. If my son had chosen comfort over his mother, that was his path. Mine would be peace and maybe a little justice. A quiet kind of justice. It began with a visit to the bank. I asked to check my account, the one Anna said she had invested my money in. The clerk looked confused, typed on her computer, then frowned. "Mrs. Kovacs," she said gently, "your balance is 0. The funds were transferred 2 years ago." I stood there, holding my breath. Transferred? To whom? She hesitated. "To a joint account in your son's name, and his wife's." For a moment, everything around me blurred. But then, a strange calm came over me. I thanked her, walked out, and stood in the sunlight. It hurt deeply, but at least now I knew the truth. They hadn't just taken my home. They had taken my trust. But that was the day my heart stopped, breaking and started hardening into something stronger. I decided then that I would not be a victim. They could take my money, but they could not take my peace. And slowly, quietly, I began to think of how to take back my life in my own way. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with patience and a plan. My revenge would not be loud. It would be the kind that leaves them wondering how the woman they underestimated found a way to stand taller than them all. That was the beginning of it. The day my heart broke was also the day I began to heal. At first, I didn't call it revenge. I only wanted to breathe again. But as the days went by, I began to feel a slow strength rising inside me, like a flame that had almost gone out and was learning to burn again. I stayed with Clara for a while. Her house was small, but it was filled with laughter and the smell of soap and lavender. She never asked too many questions. She only said, "Stay as long as you need, Maria." Those first mornings, I helped her in the garden. The earth was soft after the spring rain. I planted beans, watered the roses, and watched the sun move across the hills. Every touch of soil felt like forgiveness. Not for them, for myself. After a week, Clara said, "You need something of your own again. A place, a purpose." She was right. So I went into the village and asked about work. There was a small bakery on the corner of the main street. I had known the owner, Mr. Novak, since Peter was a boy. He looked surprised to see me, "Maria. You're still good with bread, I hope." I smiled better than ever. He hired me the same day. The pay wasn't much, but I didn't care. The first morning I kneaded dough there. I felt alive again. My hands remembered everything. The weight of flour, the feel of warm water, the patience of waiting for the dough to rise. It was work, yes, but it was also healing. The people in the village soon noticed. They said, "Maria's bread tastes like the old days." Each loaf I sold carried a little piece of my story, though no one knew it. I saved every coin I earned. Not because I wanted wealth, I had learned what wealth really meant, but because I wanted freedom that was mine alone. In the evenings, I walked back to Clara's cottage through the fields. The wind was soft, the sky wide and quiet. Sometimes I whispered to Anton, "Look, my love, I'm standing again." Months passed. Summer came, and the village was full of light. Then, one afternoon, I saw Peter. I was leaving the bakery when his car stopped beside the road. He got out, looking thinner than before, his eyes uncertain. "Mama," he said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy. "I heard you were working here," he said. I nodded. "I am." He looked around, awkward. "You should have told me. You could have stayed with us until you found something." I looked at him quietly. "You asked me to leave, Peter. I simply did as you wished." He opened his mouth, but no words came. "How's Sophia?" I asked. "She's good," he said quickly. "She asks about you." That made my chest ache. "Tell her I think of her every day." He nodded, then tried to smile. "Maybe we could visit sometime." "Maybe," I said, but we both knew I wasn't ready. As he drove away, I felt both sadness and relief. I had seen him, spoken to him, and stayed calm. That was the first step of my quiet revenge, showing him I could live without his pity or his help. Later that week, I visited the bank again. I spoke with a young clerk who helped me file a report about the money transfer. She explained that I couldn't recover it easily, but there were legal steps I could take. I thanked her, filled in the forms, and left. I didn't do it to get the money back. I did it so there would be a record, a quiet truth written down somewhere, saying I had been wronged. A few months later, a letter arrived for Peter and Anna, I imagine. Anna's face when she opened it, the calm words explaining the investigation, the request for statements, the signature of the legal officer. I wasn't there to see it, but I could almost hear her silence. That night, I slept well. Not out of spite, but because justice, even when small, can bring peace. Clara laughed when I told her. "You're braver than you look," she said. I smiled. "I'm not brave. I'm just done being silent." In time, I found a tiny house for rent on the edge of the village. It had 2 rooms, a cracked chimney, and a garden full of weeds. But when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ownership. I cleaned it myself, painted the walls, planted herbs outside the window. Every nail I hammered, every corner I swept, felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. The villagers helped. They brought old furniture, blankets, cups, laughter. "Clara said it looks like you again." And it did. One evening, I sat in the doorway watching the sunset. I realized I had built something new from nothing, not out of anger, but out of quiet courage. That was my revenge. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to make them suffer. All I needed was to live well, to find peace in my own company, to prove that love can survive even after betrayal. Months later, Peter came again. He brought Sophia this time. She ran to me shouting, "Grandma," and hugged me so tightly that tears filled my eyes. Peter stood at the gate watching. He said, "You've done well, Mama." I looked at him and smiled. "I told you I'd be fine." He nodded. "I'm sorry for how things happened. I didn't say I forgive you. Not yet. I only said, I hope you've learned to be kind." Anna didn't come. I didn't expect her to. But that night after they left, I lit a candle and whispered a prayer, not for revenge, but for release. Because the truest revenge, I realized, is peace. Peace that cannot be taken. Peace that makes others see what they lost when they lost you. And somewhere deep down, I think Peter understood that. The seasons passed gently after that. Autumn came, painting the hills in gold and red. The air smelled of firewood and fallen leaves. My little garden bloomed one last time before winter, and I stood there many mornings, watching the mist rise over the fields. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't hurt anymore. I had learned to live alone again. At first it felt strange. The silence of an empty house can be heavy, like a reminder of everything you've lost. But slowly, silence began to feel like a friend. In the mornings, I would light the stove, make a cup of tea, and sit by the window. I could hear the sound of the river nearby, the birds waking up, and the faint chime of the church bell in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was peace. Sometimes Clara came over with fresh eggs or stories from the village. We'd sit on the porch and talk about small things, recipes, whether the children running down the lane. I never told her how much her friendship meant to me. Some things don't need words. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, Clara said, "Do you ever think about going back to them?" I looked at the horizon. "Back to Peter and Anna." She nodded. "I think about them," I said quietly, "but not about going back." She didn't ask why. She just smiled sadly. Later that night, I sat by the fire thinking about my son. I still loved him. A mother's love doesn't disappear no matter how much it's tested, but it changes shape. It becomes quieter, wiser. I forgave him slowly, not in a single moment, but in small steps. Each time I saw Sophia's face, each time I breathed without anger, I forgave a little more. Forgiveness, I learned, is not a gift to others. It's a way of freeing your own heart. Winter came. Snow covered the fields like a blanket. I stayed warm inside, baking bread for neighbors and knitting scarves for children. The village began to feel like family again. One afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Peter stood there holding a basket of apples. He looked different, older, gentler, maybe even ashamed. "Mama," he said softly, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded. Of course. He sat by the fire, his hands trembling slightly. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for what you did for me, for us. I didn't see it before. I was blind and I let Anna guide me in ways I shouldn't have." I listened, silent. He looked down. "We lost a lot, Mama, not just money. We lost you." I took a deep breath. "Peter, we all make mistakes. The important thing is whether we learn from them." He nodded. "I'm trying." We talked for a long time that evening. About Sophia, about the village, about life. There were still unspoken things between us. Wounds that time hadn't fully healed, but something new had begun, understanding. When he left, he said Sophia wants to spend the summer here with you. If that's all right. I smiled, my heart swelling. It would make me very happy. And so she came, my sweet Sophia. She ran through the fields, fed the hens, and filled my home with laughter again. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. One night after she fell asleep, I sat by her bed and whispered, "You are my true blessing." I thought about all that had happened, the pain, the loss, the loneliness, and realized that if none of it had happened, I might never have found this peace. Revenge, I discovered, was never about hurting them. It was about proving to myself that I could rise again. They took my money, yes. They took my home, but they didn't take my spirit. And that spirit, quiet, patient, and still standing, was my real victory. I didn't need anyone to see it. I didn't need to boast or tell the world. It was enough to know that I had survived with my dignity, and that life, in its strange way, had brought me back to myself. Now, sometimes when I walk through the village, people greet me with smiles. "Maria, your bread smells wonderful today." Or, "Maria, your roses are the prettiest in town." And I smile back, not proudly, but peacefully, because I know what it cost to get here. In the evenings, I still talk to Anton in my heart. "I'm all right now," I tell him. "Our boy made mistakes, but he's learning, and I've found my way home again." And somewhere deep inside, I feel his answer. Not in words, but in a warmth that fills the room. When I think of my son now, I don't feel anger anymore. Just a quiet wish that life teaches him what it taught me. That love without respect is fragile, and respect without love is empty. The two must walk together, or they both fall apart. As for Anna, I haven't seen her since that day, but I no longer wish her harm. I only hope that one day she learns kindness, not as a strategy, but as a truth. Because the world can take many things from us, our money, our comfort, even our family, but it can never take our peace unless we give it away. And I will never give mine away again. When I look back now, I see everything differently. That house, that pain, that betrayal, they were all part of a long road leading me here. If you had told me back then that I would thank life for it one day, I would have laughed. But now I understand. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to see what truly matters. And my revenge. It was never about making them pay. It was about standing tall, smiling softly, and saying, "You didn't break me." So if anyone ever hears my story, I want them to remember this. Forgive when you can, walk away when you must, and never let anyone decide your worth. Because peace, my dear, is the sweetest revenge of all.